Hello and welcome to the Spandex and Wine podcast. I'm your host, Robin Hackney, and I'm so happy that you're here. This podcast is a place for conversations about balancing a healthy lifestyle and being happy, more specifically, happy hour. Together, we'll explore all things wellness and wine. I hope you learn a little, laugh a lot, and along the way, know you're not alone on this balanced wellness journey. Ready to jump in? Pour something in your glass that makes you happy because it's time for Spandex and Wine. Welcome to the Spandex and Wine podcast. I'm your host, Robin Hackney. So when you met with your high school counselor, did he or she suggest bartending or becoming a mixologist? Probably not. But today's guest, Chris Tunstall with A Bar Above, did just that and created a dream job. At A Bar Above, they create educational content around mixology and advanced mixology concepts and produce some pretty great products to create delicious cocktails, such as shakers, strainers, and things like that. Since they focus on mixology and advanced mixology techniques, they're able to use non-traditional ingredients in many drinks. This includes wine, sugar alternatives, acid alternatives, and alcohol alternatives. This allows people to have a much different conversation about health and cocktails. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and you learned something. Well, hello, Chris, and welcome to the Spandex and Wine podcast. I'm so thankful that you're here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited about this.
Oh my gosh, yes, my pleasure. I've been watching you, and let me just tell you how cool of a job that you have created for yourself, you and your wife. Oh, it's so crazy. So all the mixology, the recipes, the content, the products, the courses, everything that you do just looks so much fun and amazing. And I know that when we talked about starting or doing this interview, there were so many topics that we could go through, and it was so hard to narrow it down. And I know we decided on wine and cocktails, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about your story and how you got started.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny to hearing you talk about what we do, thinking about, in high school when you go sit down with your guidance counselor, mapping this future out for myself when I was in high school, absolutely impossible. I never would have predicted that I would have such a cool job. But as far as the company and kind of where we started, I started back, I was a craps dealer in Vegas many, many years ago.
Oh.
And I really enjoyed it. And that's kind of when my bartending journey started. But as I became more kind of looking around what a future of a craps dealer looks like, I wasn't really excited about what that looked like. So I left craps dealer, being a craps dealer, and actually moved to California. And I wanted something equally as exciting. Like if you've ever seen a craps table, when it's really on fire, there's a ton of excitement in there. Everybody's having so much fun. But the thing when you're working at craps table is you are basically in the eye of the storm. There's absolute chaos all around you, and you have a system in place in order to deal the game. And as long as you hold to that system, you can deal any game, no matter how loud it gets, how much money is on the table. You just concentrate on the system. So when I moved to California, I didn't have that anymore. I didn't have that excitement. I didn't have that kind of just, being the host of that party. And as I started thinking about it, I was like, you know what? I think bartending might kind of scratch that itch for me. So that's kind of what got me into bartending. And this was back in 2003. And this is right in the beginning when the cocktail revolution started. I mean, there was 5 people in New York and there was 5 people in San Francisco, and that was it. And so it truly was the beginning of kind of that bigger revolution. And I saw kind of the writing on the wall of what was going to happen, using fresh juices in your cocktails, higher quality ingredients, a much more refreshing drink. And I'm like, this is going to be big. So then I started learning more and more about it, and experimenting. Like a core kind of component of what we do at A Bar Above really is experimentation and pushing boundaries and really putting systems into place. So that way, when things are chaotic, you can lean on that system to do your creation. So kind of fast forward many years, I was living in Napa and I really thought I knew what I was doing. And like I said, there was 2 kind of areas. There was New York and San Francisco. And if you weren't in those 2 areas, you really weren't privy to the cutting edge. So I knew I had to get to San Francisco. And so we moved there, and I realized how little I knew. It was kind of a very humbling experience.
Yeah.
Um, but they weren't very they were very gatekeepy at the time, so they didn't give you a lot of information, which I found very frustrating. So
Hmm.
then that's kind of when we decided, okay, we're gonna start sharing this information to people that really want to understand techniques, systems, structure of cocktails, and do their own experimenting and really help to fuel their own creativity. So that's kind of what started the media side of it. We since then have launched a YouTube channel, two Facebook groups, Instagram, any social media, as well as our barware. So all the cocktail
Yeah.
shakers, strainers, and stuff that you need in order to make, cocktails. But it really was started with education and spreading best techniques and stuff with cocktails. So yeah, kind of a long
Mhm.
story.
No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, it's all just so interesting to me because, I think, okay, orange juice, vodka, screwdriver, but there's just so much more, and you've taken it to a level that is just crazy to me. And I know that you said that you now can use non-traditional ingredients to create these amazing cocktails and mocktails too, because you do that as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and it really is interesting. So once again, I really love structure and I love systems. So when we start thinking about cocktails as a structure, we have basically six cocktail families that are represented by ingredients. So if you cook, the six, the mother sauces and stuff, and you can start plugging and playing ingredients in there. Cocktails has the very same structure. Once you understand the structure, then you can start putting in new ingredients, even non-traditional ingredients, whatever you want to put in there, as long as you kind of keep in mind what you're adding into that. And it could be alcohol, it could be wine, it could be non-alcoholic ingredient, it could be stuff you create yourself. So that's the thing I love most about it is just
Mhm.
understanding the structure and then applying creativity to it it's amazing. It's so much fun.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I just think of vodka, tequila, gin, those hard, the spirits. But
Mhm.
like tonight we're going to talk about wine and cocktails, and that's not something that I would typically think about.
Yeah, and there's a long history of using wine in cocktails. And I mean, if you've ever there's a whiskey sour that actually adds a float of red wine into it, and it's called a New York sour, and it is absolutely delicious.
Hmm.
So if you ever go out to a bar next, and ask for a whiskey sour, just get a nice dry red wine on top of it, or even a fruity red, and it turns that cocktail into something absolutely magical. But like sherry, port, a lot of these other kind of like aromatized or fortified wines have been used in cocktails for hundreds of years. So there is a
Hmm.
long-standing tradition of utilizing some of these ingredients and making some really interesting drinks. Sangria is another one that you could really have a lot of
Yes.
fun
Okay.
with.
Yeah.
And I mean, on a
Yeah.
spring or summer day, there's nothing better.
Yes. Oh my gosh, absolutely. When I was 17, a friend and I we went to over to Europe, and we ended up in Seville, Spain, and went on a sangria up like a pontoon boat, and it was so much fun. They had a big bucket in the center, and everyone got a ton of fruit, and they poured a bunch of wine in there. We all danced around, poured the wine in. It was so much fun and so delicious.
Absolutely, yeah. And like there is so many different directions you could take wine and it as a cocktail ingredient, just besides just what comes out of the bottle. So one of the things I really like to do is think about like, okay, if this is the flavor I want to introduce into a cocktail, what's the best technique I can do for it? And since there is so much flavor in wine, we could really start to
Hmm.
push some boundaries and really start to explore different flavors than what we're used to. So, for example, if you turn your wine into a syrup, now you can plug that
Okay.
into any cocktail that you want, right? You could have a wine margarita. You could have a
Nice.
wine whiskey sour. So, start when I start thinking about this, I start thinking about like, okay, wine is a liquid, or you take one step back from it and you say, okay, if it is just a liquid, how can I apply technique to this liquid in order to get the best flavor, apply it to what I want to do, and modify it in whatever direction I want to kind of twist this cocktail into. So we don't really have a lot of boundaries when it comes to creating cocktails. I
Hmm.
mentioned this on a previous different podcast. that was a wine-based podcast. And I said, if you give me a 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild and say make a cocktail out of it, I'm not even going to bat an eye. I'm going to pop that bottle open. I'm going to taste it. I'm like, all right, what are we making with this? It's like there's nothing off limits for us.
Oh, that's great. That is fantastic. Well, take us through just a couple, just maybe few simple recipes.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, when we talk about using wine, we could think about it as an ingredient. So the New York sour that we talked about in the very beginning. So a
Hmm.
standard sours are kind of these one major cocktail families that I always try to teach people because it's a very easy thing to associate with. So you have two parts of base spirit, usually whiskey. You have one part acid, usually lemon juice, and one part sweet in the form of simple syrup traditionally. When you kind
Hmm.
of look at that formula, it is basically an adult lemonade. So you have lemon, which is your acid. You have sweetener that balances out your acid. And instead of water, we're using alcohol, right?
Hmm.
So it's very
Hmm.
for us to understand. Um, so once again, we're basically having a lemonade. So that is our whiskey sour. And one of the ways that you can modify a whiskey sour, or any sour that for that matter, is to incorporate an egg white into it. And this does a couple things. It builds a beautiful foam. So if you've ever seen those beautiful foamy cocktails with that nice kind of head on top of it,
Hmm.
that's because there's some kind of protein, usually egg whites in there. The egg whites, like if you think of a lemonade, it's usually kind of tart, right? Really sharp on the acid. What it does is imagine if all those sharp flavors were kind of like spikes kind of coming off that flavor. It
Hmm.
chops all those hard edges off, makes it richer, rounder, and it's a little bit more palatable. So once again, we have this kind of more mellow lemonade with a nice egg white on top of it. And now if you incorporate that red wine, probably about 2 ounces, maybe 3 ounces, it doesn't need a lot. What it does is it sits in between the egg whites and the whiskey sour. So that way, when you sip it, you get a little bit of that foam. The red wine kind of comes through at the end or in the middle. And then at the end, you have that kind of rush of that adult lemonade. And all those flavors kind of have those distinct moments that they pop
Hmm.
and then they combine, and then it becomes something more than just the sum of its parts. And that's kind of the cool thing about, dividing it out that way. So once again, kind of the recipe, two parts base spirit, one part sweet, one part sour, add about 3/4 of an ounce of egg whites, shake that up, and about 2 ounces of red wine. And I promise you, it is absolutely delicious. It's a game changer for a whiskey sour.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's so amazing that it's like an art.
It's very much is. It's a culinary art that takes a liquid form, and
Yeah.
it's just applying the right kind of culinary technique to achieve whatever you want to do. And there are many different ways you can do it. But so that is one easy recipe. And as far as like the sangrias that you had when you were in Spain, can you kind of talk about some of those flavors that really kind of stood out for you, or if there's one specific one that you're like, this was it, and even just kind of describe that. And then we can kind of
Yeah.
go through and kind of talk about how you can apply technique to make something similar to that.
Yeah. Well, I was 17, so
Oh,
not a really
nice.
sophisticated palate. But I just remember thinking, when you at 17, when you think of red wine, you just think, oh, just the bitter and tannins. But the fruit that they put in there it was just so juicy and jammy, and that's what I just remember.
Yeah, and so usually when we make sangria, it's a kind of a multi-step process. And that juicy, jammy kind of quality is because it has been soaked in sugar. So you're macerating it, right? So like if you ever have fresh strawberries, you cut them open and you put sugar on top of it, it
Hmm.
pulls all those juices out of the strawberry and it's absolutely delicious. So when we
Hmm.
make sangria, we're kind of doing something similar. And usually, like when you have bitter ingredients, the way to kind of get rid of that bitterness is to add sugar on top of it, and that kind of calms that bitterness down. So that's kind of the elements that we're working with here. And then you add usually brandy into it as well to kind of fortify it, to give it a little bit more of
Hmm.
a kick, some juices, and then even some sparkling waters. So that's kind of the approach I would take is get a bunch of different fruits, usually like red fruits or oranges and stuff like that, apples, mix them all together, throw a bunch of sugar on top of it. Once you have that liquid, you can infuse other flavors into it as well. So if you want to put some herbs in there while it's macerating, it'll help to do that as well. And then once you have that basically really intense kind of rich syrup from that fruit, now you can start applying it and adding it to that red wine. You can modify it to taste, adding a little bit of alcohol to kind of boost the flavor up. And then if you want that sparkling element, you can go back to a nice cava or a prosecco or a sparkling wine to kind of add that wine element to it,
Hmm.
boost up the alcohol content, and add a little bit more kind of brightness to that sangria as well. But
Nice.
yes, sangrias are absolutely delicious, and they are one of those kind of quintessential wine cocktails as well.
Yes. Yeah. And it's funny because you've talked about the New York sour and then sangria and red wine. And, initially I was thinking, okay, it would be more white wines that you would use
Mhm.
in a cocktail.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways you can incorporate white wine into a cocktail as well. One of my favorite things to do is actually make a mojito and take out half the sparkling water and put prosecco in there as well,
Ooh,
or like
nice.
a champagne. So then you get all that kind of wine flavor mixed in with the rum and the mint, and it's really, really delicious. And I'm sure there's a name for it. I just call them royal mojitos because they sound fancy. But there's definitely a lot of, I mean, even a white sangria, you could incorporate kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And then you have all that sharp acidity that you're working with that white wine. But you could also add a little bit more sugar, or I know a lot of the focus that you talk about on this podcast is kind of that health and wellness element
Right,
to it as
right.
well, right?
Hmm.
So instead of adding all this sugar, because I know that sugar is usually not the most healthy thing, but once we have that framework and that structure, we can start to experiment with sugar alternatives. So xylitol is a fantastic sugar alternative when we start talking about using it in cocktails. And there's all allulose and monk fruit and all these things can be used as substitutes to really start to modify your sugar intake to kind of fit your lifestyle.
Hmm.
So once again, you have the structure of what you're making, and now you know the variables and all those ingredients, and now you're basically just substituting your own personal preferences for those ingredients. So
Hmm.
hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I was going to ask that question about some alternatives to all of the sugar in it. So thank you. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
great. Oh, awesome. So with your courses then, is it like at an evening that you do a course? Is it over a span of time? I mean, I'm assuming this is just so interesting. I would think that it would take a little while.
Yeah, so when we created our very first course was back in 2014. I had this idea of like the encyclopedia of like making cocktails in my head. And my wife, girlfriend at the time, was talking to me about the business, and I was like, "Yeah, I want to sell these on DVD." And she's like, "Are you crazy? This is like 2003, like, and but up to this point, if you were a bartender and you want to learn advanced techniques like flair, flipping bottles, and doing the kind of the physical
Yeah.
side of that, that's how you did it." So I'm like, "Okay, this model exists. Let's just do that. Let's not reinvent the wheel." And she's like, "Yeah, you've heard of YouTube, right?" And I'm like, "Oh, right." Um, so when we designed that course, it was really about elevating your career behind the bar. So it was a very kind of bar focused class, and we called it the Mixology certification. And it's pretty intense. I would say, when you're talking about wine and the sommelier journey, it's very similar to that. So this is a very intense 9-week course that you can take it at your own pace. It's all online. It's not in
Hmm.
person. Um, but I recommend doing it over 9 weeks. And kind of how we talked about the structure of cocktails and kind of adding different techniques into it. That's kind of the way we approach it. So we look at every variable that exists inside of making a cocktail, like coming up with your own cocktail recipe. And then we go and really pinpoint every single variable that is inside of that cocktail. So for example, our very first course is on acids. And when you use acids in cocktails, it's typically lemon or lime because they have the highest pH or the
Hmm.
most intense pH. But there's also pineapple juice, orange juice, cranberry juice. So those are your major fruit juices. And then we take a step beneath that and say, okay, if you're not using fruit juices, what could you use? You could use verjus, you could use vinegars, you could use a number of different kind of generic acids to add that acidity to a cocktail. But then when you go one step further, you can do refined acids. So now you could have citric acid, you could use malic acid, you could use tartaric acid, and really start to boost the pH when it comes to that. So for the purpose of this conversation, let's say I wanted to add that Bordeaux, or I wanted to add a, Napa Cab into my margarita. I could add citric acid to my Bordeaux so that it hits, like from a pH perspective, like lime juice, but it brings all of that flavor of that Napa Cab into my cocktail now. So that is just acids. And then we do the same thing with sugars. And then we do the same thing with, so it's a really deep course. And
Yeah.
I mean, if you're passionate about cocktails, I would highly recommend doing it. But many of the other courses are a little bit on the lighter side. So we did an flavor manipulation series where we talk about infusions as a technique, and we just kind of go down the rabbit hole with infusions. And then syrups as well, how to make your own syrups, and then how to make your own bitters and tinctures. And those courses probably going to take a handful of days because you're going to be doing a lot of experimenting and a lot of tasting and stuff like that. But yeah, it can be a lot of fun. On the mocktail side, it's a little bit lighter, but we really try to give you the basics, more advanced stuff. And then once we establish that kind of core language with our students, then we go crazy and show you, okay, now that once you master all those skills, this is what's possible. Like we show them how to make their own non-alcoholic tequila, their own non-alcoholic rum from scratch. And
That's so
then,
cool.
yeah, so we really want to inspire creativity. We want to give our students kind of all the basic knowledge they're going to need in order
Hmm.
to have a flavor, a combination of flavors in mind, and really have the techniques to master it and bring that to reality. So we're not telling you this is how you make an X, Y, or Z. We are saying this is the framework that X, Y, or Z operates inside of. These are all the variables that you have under your control from a flavor and a technique perspective. What are you going to do? And just let them come up with stuff. So
Hmm.
that's kind of the approach that we take with our education, is more, inspirational and kind of showing what's possible.
I love it. And I do think that your high school counselor would be proud of you, and especially your chemistry teacher.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. So I read somewhere that you were frustrated as a bartender with some of the tools and the glasses and such that you were dealing with. And I know for me, I live in a small town in Kansas, and there's like one bar and grill. And I enjoy going there, but the wine glasses I can't stand. I'm like a wine glass snob. So
hmm
tell me what started you with your products. I heard, the frustration, but take us to and tell us about everything that you offer.
Yeah, so when we came up, or the thing that I was dealing with was I was tending bar. I was been a bartender for 15 years, and mostly engineering cocktail menus and being a manager. And the last place I worked with or worked at was a very, very high volume place in San Francisco. It was, if you're familiar with Tyler Florence from the Food Network, I
Hmm.
ran his operation or his cocktail program there, and it was just always busy, constantly busy. So my kind of claim to fame I always tell everybody is, if there's a bar tool that exists, I have probably broken it behind the bar, and I know what's going to break. So when I was buying bar tools, then the thing that I realized was, our bartenders are in the world of hospitality. We are constantly expected to give hospitality to people and being very hospitable and making them feel very welcome. And when I was buying these bar tools, and there's one company that comes to mind in particular, they catered specifically to bartenders, but they weren't very hospitable. So when things went wrong, that was it. There was no
Hmm.
recourse. It was like, sorry, that is all there. I can't do anything for you. And I found it extremely frustrating when we are being ambassadors to their barware to our
Yeah.
customers, and they didn't turn around and give us even halfway decent customer service. So when we started the podcast and we started doing our YouTube channel, we would get constantly asked, like, what bar tools do you recommend? And so I couldn't recommend them because of the frustration that I felt with when I was buying. And there just wasn't any quality barware on Amazon at that time. This was probably back in 2016. Um, so after 2000 or 2 years of getting this question asked to us constantly, we're like, well, nobody else is going to do it, so let's go ahead and fix it. So that's kind
Yeah.
of what started it. And so like little tiny things that you wouldn't know, like for example, let me grab a bar tool and I'll kind of describe it for you. Um, this is a Japanese jigger, and this is a kind of for anybody that's not that can't see this, I'll kind of describe it. You have two cones, one kind of small, wider cone and one tall, slender cone, and it is joined in the middle by a little metal ring. So on the bottom, the kind of small wide cone, that is kind of where we measure our 1 ounce pours, and on the tall, slender side, we measure our 2 ounce pours. Um,
Hmm.
in the middle, you have that metal ring, but it is deceptive because it's not actually joined. It's just kind of a mask to cover up the joint. The only thing that's holding those two cones together is three tiny welds,
Hmm.
and that's where it separates. So on a busy Friday night, I'm gonna
Mm.
push down on that little tiny metal ring, and it's gonna pop off, splitting my jigger in two. And it has happened quite a bit on me. So we know where the failure points are. And so what we do is we kind of add more functionality and more durability to our equipment. So for this, on the cocktail or on that ring, we weld it all the way around. So this is basically
Okay.
one solid piece of metal from the small cone all the way to the top of the big cone. And
Hmm.
not only that, but for our jiggers, we have every 1/4 ounce measurement all the way up to 2 and a bar screw measurement. And from my understanding, I don't know if there's any other bar tool company that does that kind of level of markings and calibration on their tools. So every piece of hardware that we have has been fixed from my perspective, from like the points of failure.
Yeah.
And this is kind of our form of customer service, or my form of customer service. If it fails on you on a Friday night, then I've kind of done a bad job designing the tool because I know what it's like.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way we approach tools, and we're very, very passionate about our customer service and
Yeah.
making sure that we make really durable tools. So basically, I'm just trying to give the best quality tools to professional bartenders, so that way their bartending gear is the least part of their frustration.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, and it's not just to professional bartenders also. I mean, like I can go online and I can order anything. And the other thing that I saw that you do, and I don't think it was just for Valentine's Day, I think it's ongoing, is your
Mhm.
date night box.
Yes.
That's so
And that is
fun.
super fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that one is my wife and I having a lot of fun on camera, and also kind of breaking down some really easy cocktails to make. And we basically just walk you through the process of making a couple of drinks.
Hmm.
We give you the shopping list, we give you the recipes, we kind of walk you through that whole process. So that way you can focus on having a great night with your
Yeah.
date, having a lot of fun, having some conversation. But the last thing you want to worry about is the cocktails. So
Right.
we got you covered as far as that goes.
Ah, that's great. Now, did that come about during 2020 or was that something recently?
That actually just launched.
Oh, did it?
So believe it
Okay.
or not, that was like probably, I think we filmed that beginning of the year, maybe like
Okay.
January.
Okay. Well, I
And like,
saw it and I didn't
yeah,
know if it was
so
just for Valentine's Day. And I thought, well, maybe that happened when everyone was stuck at home. I don't know.
yeah, that was a wild time for sure.
Oh gosh, how fun. So tell me, like, if someone wanted to find your courses, where would they go?
Yeah, so everything that we offer is over at our website, which is shop.abarabove.com. So that's where you can find all the courses that we offer. And I think we're up to 8 different courses at the moment. And
Nice.
that's where you can find all of the cocktail equipment that we offer, the shakers and strainers and all that. So,
Okay. Okay, cool. And that date night box, that's fun.
and the day night box, absolutely. Yep.
I really like that. Because everyone's looking for something kind of fun and different to do. And I think it was great timing with Valentine's Day. I know my husband and I, it sounds crazy, but like we play cornhole. That's something that we do together. You guys mix drinks together, and now you offer that to other couples as well. So I think that's really cool.
Absolutely. Yes. And it's super fun. I love filming it with my wife because we're both kind of geeks. So
That's
we have a
great.
lot of fun, and yeah, it's good times.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And then on Instagram and Facebook, how can people find you there?
So we've been around for quite a while. So we were kind of in the beginning with the social media. So most of our handles are all the same, at a bar above.
Great.
Or if you search for a bar above, you can probably find us on most of the social platforms with that.
Nice. Oh, that's so cool. Again, just a job that you never would think about. You're right, in high school, and look at you now.
It's been a journey, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing this time. I've really enjoyed it, and I've learned, and I can't wait to go on your site and learn even more.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Well, that was a cool conversation. If you can't tell, I was really excited about that date night box. So, Dave, if you're listening, might want to put that on your list. Here are a few takeaways. 1, your passion can become your purpose. Shock your high school counselor and create success going after a dream. 2, mixology is truly an art of creating, inventing, preparing, and serving cocktails or mixed drinks. Understanding structure and applying creativity is all it takes. 3, wine can absolutely be used in cocktails just like traditional spirits. Think about the flavor you want to create and explore. There are no boundaries. 4, there are alternatives to sugar when mixing cocktails to make it a healthier version. Monk fruit, agave, honey, those are just a few. 5, Barware does make a difference. Invest in quality products like those offered by Chris at a bar above. All the links for the courses, barware, products are all in the show notes. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to follow Spandex and Wine so you don't miss an episode. To do this, just go to the podcast and click subscribe or follow wherever you are listening. Look for the plus sign or follow button. This is one of the best things that you can do for the podcast. If you'd also be willing to give a 5-star review, that would be amazing and much appreciated. Lastly, please share an episode with a friend or 5 to keep the love going, and join the Spandex and Wine community in our private Facebook group by searching Spandex and Wine. Feel free to reach out to me at any time by emailing info@spandexandwine.com or text me at 913-392-2877. I appreciate you. Thank you.